Greetings! Welcome back to this channel. In today's video, we are doing some swatching. If you've kept up with the videos, you probably remember that I recently talked about new colors from brands like DaVinci, Daniel Smith, and Schmincke. Now, thanks to a very kind subscriber and friend of the channel who sent me generous samples, I can go through the colors in person and compare with other swatches that I might have. So I'm really excited to do this, and let's get right into it. The first color here is DaVinci's New Gold. It is a mix of two pigments, PY83, so pigment yellow 83, diarylide yellow, and PR101, pigment red 101, synthetic iron oxide red. So picture a kind of warm yellow with a sort of slightly muted red. Looking at this color swatched on paper, I feel like it's really reminiscent of quinacridone gold and the quinacridone gold hues we're familiar with. It is a warm yellow-orange, which seems to be a bit more orange when you look at the mass tone, and then a bit more yellow when you look at the color diluted. I wanted to mix this color with other DaVinci colors because I kind of like to do mixes within the same range when I first get into a color, but I don't have really any DaVinci colors on hand. What I have on hand from DaVinci is these super generous dot card that my friend Elodie gave me, and also a pan of manganese blue mix because I really like this color, and it's one of the last colors that is commercially available and that still has some genuine manganese blue in it. Long story short, I have these 8 colors and I'm gonna do mixes with the New Gold and these colors. So if you look at my swatches, I have a tiny square at the bottom. That's the color that I'm mixing with, and all of them are a mix of New Gold and that little color in the small square. I think these mixes are really interesting. With the 2 turquoise colors and the manganese blue, we get this really interesting green that has some granulation throughout. So it's kind of a multiple hues within the same color, which is really cool. We also get something really interesting with Artemis, the purple. There's some really nice granulation in there, and mixing it with a warm yellow-orange kind of mutes it down even more. It's this very textural brown purple color that I think was also really cool. The other 4 colors that I have on hand are more smooth. Even the raw umber natural doesn't have that much granulation in it, but they still made for really interesting mixes, and I feel like overall it makes all of these colors really cohesive in the mixes. I also have a good selection of quinacridone gold hue swatches, so I'm gonna compare some of these. You can kind of see how it's a color that would be in the same family of colors, but there's no actual dupe of this New Gold color. There's not even a color within my swatches that has the same mix of pigments. There's a few that have the same mix of pigments, but there are colors that I don't have, so I can't really compare swatches in person, but from the ones I have, there's nothing that's exactly like it. I'm very happy to be able to swatch this color. It's just as pretty as I expected. I really like this kind of hue, and I really love how it mixed with other colors. Moving on to the Daniel Smith new colors. These are also colors that I wanted to see with my own eyes for a few reasons. One of them being that I've mentioned this before, but I find Daniel Smith's online swatches really unreliable. I don't know what's up with them, but they really process their swatch way too much, and it's getting difficult sometimes to really know what a color is like. So having the colors in front of me, actually painted from the paints, is really interesting. Now, I'm sorry, I don't have video of me painting the first 2 swatches. I had a bit of a problem with my camera, but I caught it as I was setting down paint for Coral Reef. So you'll be able to see the swatches for what I would consider the 3 most interesting paints of this release. But anyway, let's go through the first 3 colors and then we can talk about the other 3 colors. I feel like there's this separation within this release where you can really group the first 3 colors together and then the 3 last colors together. The first 3 colors are all pigments mixed with a white pigment. So they're these tints. That's what we call a tint when a color is mixed with white. And I was looking through my notes again to see what I had written down about these and to see if I had any swatches that I could compare these to. And really, I didn't find much for these three colors. The Jaune Brillant number 1, the only paint that I could find that listed the same pigments is from a Canadian store brand. The store is called Opus, and they have this yellow, corn silk yellow, that features the same lineup of colors. For Jaune Brillant number 2, the only dupe that I was able to find is from Nevskaya Palitra or White Nights. I don't have this color either, I'm sorry. So I can't really compare in person with that paint, as it's not part of my collection. For the third color, Coral Reef, there's quite a few dupes. Mainly Holbein and Mugello would be the most easily available ones. There are similar mixes from other brands that are less common. Now I have this color from Holbein, so I can compare the swatches, and if you look at them, you can see that they're very, very similar in hue. Like the color is the same. What seems to be the main variance between these two is that the Daniel Smith one seems to be stronger in the mass tone. Like when you put the paint down at full strength, it seems to be stronger than the Holbein one. Okay, the three other colors. Manganese Violet. This one has a lot of paint siblings throughout other brands. It is quite a common pigment. I was looking at the website Artist Pigments, and the website lists 39 other paints that have the same pigment as a single pigment paint. So that's quite a lot. I have a few swatches I can compare. I feel like it's a fairly consistent pigment overall, but if you look more closely, you can see that perhaps the Daniel Smith one seems to lean a little bit more blue, just a little bit. The other swatches that I have kind of have varying degrees of granulation, but they're all fairly similar in terms of hue. Kind of feels like Manganese Violet is not one of those pigment that fluctuates a lot, depending on where you source it from. It seems like a really nice color, and it has this beautiful granulation, so I feel like the Daniel Smith one is a good example of what this pigment can do. Now we go to Cobalt Green Deep. That's another one that has quite a few paint siblings. The website lists about 20 of them. For this color, we see a bit more variation in the hue for the pigment. If you look at all the swatches, some will lean a bit more blue, some will lean a bit more green, some will be a bit more dark. So there's again some variance within this pigment number. I have a few swatches that I can compare again. So if we look at the Winsor Newton one, you can see that the hue is just a bit different, and the granulation is different too. For the Schmincke swatch, the hue is also a bit different. It's not quite a match, but the granulation seems to be much closer to the Daniel Smith paint. And lastly, the Roman Schmal swatch that I have. Now, this color is very similar with the beautiful granulation and hue. The last color is Earthy Light Red. Now, this one only has a single other paint made from the same pigment. It's Roman Schmal's Ginger Red. Ginger Red came out a few years ago, and at that time it was the only paint that featured this pigment. So now we have two. They're very, very similar in hue. And as this pigment is not exactly a common pigment, it's very possible that the pigment is sourced from the same place for these two paints, which would then explain why they're pretty much the same hue and texture. It is a really fun color. I really like it. It has a beautiful texture, and it's kind of a really nice, kind of flat, in the sense that it's the same hue throughout, whether the paint is put down strongly or diluted, seems to be the same color throughout, and it's a really nice, slightly muted orange color. So regarding this particular release, I feel like the last three colors are the most interesting, especially as a pigment nerd. These three colors, they bring pigments that were not within the Daniel Smith range before. They bring them in and they add them to the already very wide selection of colors. So in that aspect, I think that's really cool. The paints themselves, all of them, they're still pretty much out of my budget. For me, here in Canada, they're about $20 per tube, so they're not exactly what I would call accessible, but they're nice. And lastly, the last batch of colors that I want to go through are the colors from Schmincke's signature edition of 2025. We get 5 colors in this release, and I was super excited to swatch these in person as well. Okay, well, maybe not the buff titanium. I mean, I love buff titanium. It's a great color, but it is not a surprising pigment in any sense of that word. I was able to get a dot card from Schmincke, which is really nicely presented. It came in a nice envelope with a handwritten note, which is very nice. I'm very grateful. However, and I realized that as I opened the card, Schmincke still favors these very small dots. And while these will give you an idea of what a color is like, it always feels a bit incomplete. I can't really see the color as much as I want to. I want to be able to go deeply into a color and to get a sense for how strong I can make it and how light I can make it. And I feel like their dot cards, while really nice, are a bit limited in that aspect. So cue the very generous sample I received. Now with these, I was able to paint the swatches I wanted to see with the depth I wanted to test out. So let's get right to it. Oh, before that, also what I did for these is that I went through my Schmincke dot card and I tried to locate their paints made from the pigments used in the mixes. I wanted to set up a kind of deconstructing the mix or a recipe swatch list next to the colors. There's no way to know which version of the pigment they use for some of these mixes, but still I wanted to have some idea of what went into this mix to create this color. I was able to find all of the pigments on the dot card. Now you'll see some empty squares on my swatch card as I paint. That's because I got a bit confused and I counted in the colors from the Academy range and I was like, oh, I don't have these on my dot card, but of course you don't have these on your dot card if this dot card is for the Horadam range, the professional range. So when I cleaned this up, I erased those squares, but that left some weird empty spaces here and there, and I just wanted to explain this quickly. Anyway, buff titanium. It is a beautiful neutral beige. It is the absolute definition of a beige color. It has a faint bit of texture, I feel like, but it's difficult to see because it's a fairly light color. It is not made from any pigment on the dot card. It is its own single pigment paint that was not part of the range before, and it is made from pigment PW6:1, so a variant of our friend Titanium White, but in this case, buff titanium. Second color is Wild Purple. This one is made from 3 pigments: PV19, Pigment Violet 19, PB29, Pigment Blue 29, or Ultramarine Blue, and PG17, Pigment Green 17. The Schmincke Horadam range has 3 paints that feature PV19. You get Permanent Carmine, Quinacridone Violet, and Ruby Red. So these are the 3 pink-purple colors at the top. Then they have 2 Ultramarine Blues, PB29. You have French Ultramarine and Ultramarine Finest. And then for the last color, the green, this one is peculiar because you get 2 paints that use this pigment. You get one that's Chromium Oxide Green, but you also get their Hematite Black that is made from a variation of this green pigment, but that looks completely gray. So I don't know which one went into the mix, but it's really curious to see. The mix color, the Wild Purple color, has a beautiful granulation and color separation. You can see it throughout the swatch that some areas appear a bit more pink, some areas have a bit more of that blue granulation in them, and I think that's a really fun color that has a lot of potential for bringing texture and character to a painting. Next, we have Atoll Blue. This one is made from 2 pigment, Pigment Blue 16, PB16, and PG50, Pigment Green 50. Schmincke only has 1 paint featuring each pigment in their range, so it's pretty safe to assume that Atoll Blue is made from these 2 colors specifically. It is an absolutely beautiful, deep staining blue in the maston, like a cool blue, a slightly yellow blue. And then as you dilute the color, it reveals this texture and this softness that the PG50 brings into the mix. I understand why they called it Atoll Blue. It makes me want to paint turquoise seas. I really like it. Then we have Cologne Bridge Green. Now this one is the one that I was the most unsure of because of the white pigments that are listed first in the mix. It's, you know, it's always a bit of a flag, like maybe a yellow flag instead of a red flag when a color starts by listing white pigments. This one is made from 6 pigments. So we have 2 white pigments, 1 yellow pigment PY42, 1 red pigment PR242, and then 2 green pigments PG7 and PG18. So that's white, yellow, red, and green, all mixed and balanced out to make another green. All of these pigments have a single paint within the Horadam range, except yellow, which has 3. The yellows are fairly similar in hue though, so I don't really think it's key to figure out which one. I might sound a bit annoyed, but I really like this swatch. It's a really nice hue and has a really fun texture, and out of curiosity, I would have loved to see this mix without the white pigment, how it looks if it's all that different. It is better than I expected, and I would not have been able to tell that just from looking at the swatches online, so I'm really glad I was able to swatch it firsthand. Lastly, we have Shadow Gray. I was really looking forward to this one because I feel like we haven't seen a lot of cadmium pigments in mixes all that much. This color is basically what happens if you take an ultramarine blue with granulation and you mute it down by mixing in a complementary color, orange. It is really pretty. I love it. I think it's possibly the most versatile color of this release because I feel like it would be the easiest to use for anyone, no matter what you're trying to paint. And that's it for this closer look at these colors. I'm very grateful for the samples. Thank you so much. There's no way I could have nerded out about these colors without them. And I love a good nerding out about pigments and paints. What do you guys think? Did any of the swatches that I've shown change your impression of these colors? Do you have a favorite or a new favorite? Please let me know in the comments. I always like to read what you think and to nerd out about these paints with you guys in the comments. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. Again, thank you so much for the samples, and we will see each other in the next video. Take care. Bye bye.